Hello, hello. It's been a bit of a break here on the podcast, but I'm so pleased to be back with you all. So thank you so much to everyone who's tuning in. This is an especially special event, I suppose, or episode. Well, it feels like an event to me because this week's guest is someone whose music and words I have listened to and someone I've watched perform for a number of years, as well as someone whose name has come up several times in previous podcast conversations and episodes. So without further ado, I would like to introduce this episode's guest, who is none other than award-winning composer, musicologist, tenor, activist, and Tobique First Nation song carrier, Jeremy Dutcher. For a quick background, Jeremy is not someone who's easy to pin down, whose music seeks to, in his words, transcend boundaries by unapologetically incorporating Western classical influences with his reverence for the traditional songs of his home. In continuing his ongoing practice of listening, dialogue, and sonic repatriation, I am so looking forward to speaking about reclaim and reactivation through music. Welcome, Jeremy.
Hi there. I'm so happy to join you here. And in our way, we're taught to introduce ourselves in our language first. So I will do that and then I'll translate to English. So, kwapsida when tele wispugduya jiplog and duje our neighborhood wanaki kakaku snagamal simudo them. Naga to get we go Georgiage Mujin tak no. Mga ulidahandaman eheo. So I just said that I'm very happy to be here. Hello, everyone. My name is Jeremy Dutcher. I come from Wolastoq territory, which is on the east coast of what some call Canada. And I bring in the Raven and the Wolf clan as I'm here with you today. And yeah, that would be how we will introduce ourselves in our way. And then I said I'm a song carrier, I'm a singer, which is a sort of traditional designation for we all have a role in our community, and this just happens to be mine. So I've been kind of helped in that way from a young age, by some of the elders and the knowledge keepers in our community that have passed on a lot of our songs, because the way our music works and the way it gets passed on is very different from a classical tradition, right? And so I didn't necessarily go to an institution or a school to study these songs, but just coming up in the community, and there's this kind of like one-on-one more mentorship between our elders and the song keepers and the people that carry those songs forward from generation to generation. And we don't have it written down in the same way, right? And so it takes that oral tradition and that in real time propagation of our music to pass it on. So I've been mentored in my life by a couple very generous and wonderful song keepers, and that's how I get my songs, and that's sort of where I begin as a musical person. But then added into that, I'll say, is also the classical elements of my training and my teaching that have allowed me to paint my traditional music with as broad of palette as possible, because I have all of these different ways of tapping into voice and sound and yeah, I guess just exploration and play. I love music. That's what I do for a living, and I'm very, very lucky to do that. Even though it's shifted a little bit right now, but yeah, I'll just say that to introduce myself. That my name is Jeremy, and I love music.
I love that that's like like kind of a beautiful and simple sentiment to go down to, because honestly, sometimes I forget that I'm doing this because I love music. It's just really easy to forget it in the industry. So it's a nice reminder to hear someone say that.
It's because it's the most basic truth of all of us that are doing this work, is that when the day is done and the work, kind of gets through our head, music is what brings us back and what heals us, Mm-hmm. So yeah, I know we're a shared mind in that way. So yeah, I've been really eager to have this conversation, because I think the ways in which we can complicate or problematize this idea of what we're even talking about when we're talking about classical music, I think is to our service, because I think we're in a moment right now where those lines maybe aren't as clear as they once were, and maybe it's not even necessary to be. So I think there's a lot of generative possibilities in this moment about what we can, even call this. I don't even, to be honest, I don't want to start this conversation with but I don't even use the term classical music so much anymore. I read this term Western art music, and I quite like that because I think it actually, it speaks more, I guess, balanced about, other types of musics. So it's because, every type of music has classics. So I come from a different tradition that's maybe not so much in line with the like Western European musical tradition, although I do love that kind of music and I do sing that kind of music sometimes. Coming, as an Indigenous person to the site of what we might call Western art music, can be kind of a fraught thing sometimes, because there's not a lot of us making music in that space. And so the examples, when I looked out as a young sort of music maker and I looked out at the landscape of the canon and sort of how it saw or how it imagined Indigenous people of North America, I was kind of shocked to know that either it's there or it's really, really coming from a place of well, I'll call it plainly racism and othering, of our people, and I'm really a proponent of, nothing about us without us. It's really important that whoever's being represented, they need to be at the table to guide how that representation is going to go. So I guess it was through studying and being in classical music institutions that I came to understand that, oh, maybe there's another pathway to take, that we can honor who we are as people of culture and people of of this place, Indigenous people to this place, and maybe we can bring that to the site of classical music, and that will be beautiful just on its own. And then the music's on top of that, because I really do believe like our traditional songs and our melodies are just some of the most beautiful I've ever heard. And I hope to, so I set to kind of arranging those melodies, and that's kind of maybe why we're talking here today, is because I kind of sit at the intersection of, I guess, Indigenous music, but I was also trained as a tenor. So I kind of have that sort of classical music education as well. And I guess a big part of my work is just trying to balance those two worlds that are kind of at times polar opposite, but as the more time that I spend kind of putting those two musics in dialogue with each other, the more I realize that, I actually don't know that they're all that different, because they take the same amount of breathing and connection to body to sing them, and to sing of your spirit and sing from your spirit. So I think, I try to marry those two worlds all the time, but sometimes it's easier than others.
Well, you mentioned kind of earlier before the two aspects of your music training joining together to make this kind of unified stream to your work. Is that something you always wanted to do from a really early age, or when you were first emerging as a performer?
Well, I hope it's a unified thing. Sometimes it feels pretty scattered, but sometimes you just cobble it together on one record and put it out, and hope that it makes sense to somebody. I try to think of it in the ways of like, I'm able to use more types of paints and brushes and sculpt things in new ways, rather than feel like it's a conflict, in myself. Although I felt that too. I try not to live in that place of musical conflict, and try to like put them in dialogue instead. So that can sometimes be difficult, like for example, we went across, I made this record called Wolastoqiyik Lintuwakonawa, which was a record of songs in my language based on old archival recordings from the early 1900s. And we got to take those into symphony halls all across Canada. And we got to collaborate with the country's top symphonies. You know, it was incredible, and we brought our ancestor music into those spaces, and we reverberated them, and we brought our people into those spaces. And I think for me, it's like what can be most important is the representation that I'm getting to go and offer, you know, and really reclaim and claim for the first time maybe these kind of like spaces of Western art music that have, when they have engaged our people, it hasn't been, it's been, you know, maybe how would I say this? Paternalistic, or from a sense of like, yes, we have this is the music of pedigree, and we're going to explore some cultural folk music, and isn't that wonderful? No, 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 no. I hope we can ring in a new way of seeing, because all music, all peoples have musics, and you know what I've seen in my own experience is people that work maybe even 10 times as hard to nail our traditional music and to make sure that it's sung in just the right way and make sure their language is just correct. And that same work ethic happens in the classical realm as well. I've seen both. And yet one gets kind of elevated in this way of like, well, don't they work hard to like, and oh, isn't it like amazing? And yes, it is, you know, but I just hope to not just reflect the beauties of my own people back to themselves, to say, hey, look, our way is beautiful too, but also to open up the classical music space and to say that we really need to start thinking about whose story is getting put on stage. You know, I think I look at the companies here. I think Europe's a bit of a different story in terms of, you know, houses and companies that are willing to take risks, because I think audiences are willing to take risks. But here, it's really, really like they're just putting on the classics, you know. And that's again why I struggle with this word, is like, because I think it's coming from a very, very particular lens. And if we don't name that, if we don't talk about it, it's the great unseen, right? Like it's what we don't talk about, which is that like all of our sense of what classical music is tied up with the history of white Europe. And you know, it's like, and then that's changing a little bit, but our entire sense of what counts as fine music is distorted. Mm-hmm. I hope that all the time we can have conversations to not make people feel bad about that, because I have no interest in that, but just open up another possibility and say like, yeah, amazing. And then this is not to say we all need to go to a world music festival next week. You know, I don't think that's everyone's path to it, but try to, you know, incorporate some difference into the ways we're programming, you know. And for these houses and for these companies and for the people that are programming music, you know, I've heard time and time again, oh, our audiences aren't ready for that, you know. You know, like you know, and it's like, well, that's your job. Then you need to prepare them, and you need to educate them to let them know that there's more than just what you've been offering them for the last, you know, 100 years. And you know, we can all do this together, but it takes a real institutional effort to educate and to make accessible other forms of music and knowledge that aren't so rooted in a particular worldview.
If you touched on that thing about programming, it's such a big problem in Australia. We are also, unlike you, very, very conservative. So when you open a program, we tend to have Beethoven, Bach, Brahms, and they're kind of the big three in like across the entire nation. And only in the last, I'd say, 2 or 3 years have they begun systematically trying to engage our First Nations peoples in Australia to be involved in the concert hall. But even then, it's like one person annually, 2 people annually, and I can't help but think sometimes it feels a little bit
tokenistic.
Of course, you know, and I think we really need to get past this, because you know, it is wonderful that we're getting in these spaces and having and sharing our music, but until it comes from, you know, until we got our people on the boards of these institutions, until you know, our people feel like we can come into that space in a comfortable way and we're not judged for what we wear or like how we show up to that space, you know, it's like, it's a real but anyway, I don't know. But again, I don't know how far this stretches out to, because if I had in my ideal world, we're reconsidering how we're even formatting the concert hall,
Yes.
because I don't know that if, Indigenous people or, Torres Strait Islanders or, anybody and, any Indigenous person in the world would sit down and create a concert hall that looked like this is the stage and that is the audience. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think it would definitely, anyway, I'm just going by my mind. I think I would like create some kind of like other way of doing it. That anyway, I was just really tangent now.
I know what you mean.
Redesign the whole concert hall concept, but there's some beautiful ones in Germany too that I saw quite recently that have this kind of in the round, but really like acoustically beautiful spaces as well. And I thought, wow, it was so much more of an inclusive and like immersive space too. I found, because I feel like kind of separated sometimes from like as an audience member looking on a stage, it can be a form of like separation or like I don't know. Yeah, I guess I've been thinking about this a lot because I'm like trying to design my next show.
Very cool.
My next like kind of live format, and I think it might be in the round.
I see.
Yeah, but I don't know. I'm kind of been also straddling this place between where my music fits, right? Because I have been playing in like theater spaces and concert halls, and but increasingly I understand that that's a limited space in terms of who you get to speak to.
And what kind of audience it feels comfortable enough to even enter that sort of space, because it's designed to be exclusive. And kind of like you mentioned before, we're separated because Western art music has built a structure where the audience is expected to be kind of passive in their experience. So you kind of sit back and take this grand music in rather than participate in it.
Which is I guess is a whole different kind of experience, and understand why we have that kind of like wash of experience. I hope to breathe another kind of way of thinking into that space, and try to make it a little, because that was the way that, like, when we talk about Indigenous music and how it's traditionally practiced, I mean, I can only speak for the context over here, but it truly is collective. We sing together, and these songs are shared songs among all peoples. So those lines of like performer and of audience are really blurred in our contexts. So I think that's important to acknowledge, and sometimes why our music doesn't always fit in a classical music space is because it's not a passive activity, and even what these songs are for. Like, I think this idea of an audience and this idea of song as entertainment is something that's also a little foreign to our ears, because song is action. It's connected to life. It's connected to how we move through space and our activities that we do. So if we are going down the river in a canoe, we're going to sing that canoe song as we go. It's connected to the ways in which we live our lives. And so to decouple it from that is to also change what the song is, and to change what that even does. And two, when we talk about, because Western art music has been so codified and so detailed and so transcribed, when we talk about another kind of music that doesn't move in that way, and yet carries the same amount of detail and pedigree, in order to be able to understand the nuances of that music. Um, when we start to look at song not just as entertainment, but as a carrier of culture, and also a carrier of language and of and law, which is it's kind of a new concept to me, this idea of language as law. But I was out in the west coast of Canada, like in what some call British Columbia, but I was visiting with some Indigenous people there, and they were saying, and they have this very strong understanding, and it was new to me, but it really resonated with me. And then I came around here and started talking about it with my people, and they were like, yeah, for sure. Because there's this idea that song is law, and it's a song in an oral culture. When you don't have writing systems, song then becomes much more than entertainment. It becomes a legal forum in which we pass on our ideas and how we are to relate to one another. And so those song keepers then become the keeper of the record, you know, of how we are to relate to each other. So that inspired me for sure. Maybe I'm just biased as somebody who loves music, but it really did. It made what I'm trying to do, to try to like highlight the songs of my people and our languages and all of that. It made it feel real, and it made it feel like, oh yeah, it's contributing to something that hopefully will live a really long time, you know, because yeah, I have this worry. You know, we are our language is in a really, really hard place right now, because of the impacts of colonization and things like the boarding schools, the residential schools that we had here in Canada, but also in Australia and in America and in Scandinavia, all over the world. This happened to Indigenous people, where our kids were taken and attempted to be re-educated away from our traditions. And so a lot of our languages have been severely diminished in their usage and in their general fluency among our peoples. We're kind of at a point right now where we have less than 100 fluent speakers left of our particular language here on the East. And so, and it's not true coast to coast. You know, there's languages with thousands of speakers, and that's and tens of thousands, and it's amazing. But particularly on the East Coast here, we are in a pretty dire situation with our language, so that, you know, maybe even in this next generation, we might not have any speakers that were fluent at birth or that came up in the language. You know, so. Yeah, for me, the music and the work that I'm doing is all kind of in service of that, because we're really kind of in the 11th hour of this sort of struggle, and yeah, we got to do everything we can. And so the record that I made was all in Wolastoqiyik language, and that was a very intentional, and no translations provided as well. And that was a very intentional decision, actually, because I wanted very much to speak to our people directly, and to, I guess, like we never convince anybody of anything. I don't think. I think we can only show people our passion and show them our light and our interest in something, and maybe then that will spark something in them. And so for me, the kind of thesis of my work, or what I wanted to do, was to highlight the preciousness of our language and of our traditional music, and lift it up in the highest way that I could. And I was able to use, you know, the paintbrushes of classical music or Western art music to make that a really beautiful painting, I hope. But it was all in service of the project of Wolastoqiyik language revitalization, and in showing, you know, my people how beautiful they are.
For our first intermission is an excerpt of the first work on Jeremy's 2019 debut album, Wolastoqiyik Lintuwakonawa. This work is entitled Menkinut, and to reflect on this performance, I leave you with some words from Jeremy. I'm doing this work because there's only about 100 Wolastoqiyik speakers left. It's crucial for us to make sure that we're using our language and passing it on to the next generation. If you lose the language, you're not just losing the words. You're losing an entire way of seeing and experiencing the world from a distinctly Indigenous perspective. Yes, I was about to ask you about the album, and essentially, I actually wanted to know, like, on maybe a more boring or technical side, how you approached integrating your language into it. Because I know you've done research in the archives and the museums in Canada as well, and whether or not that played a part in how you produced the album in the end.
Oh, totally. Great question. I'm so happy to talk about that time in my life because it was almost 6 years ago now, but it was really transformative. And it kind of set me on a really amazing path, you know, where I get to do this for my life and get to share music and my culture and my language in a really wide way. So I guess it started, yeah, 6 years ago now. I was seated around the kitchen table of one of the elders here. Her name is Maggie Paul, and she's a song carrier as well. And she knew that I was really, really interested in the old songs, like the traditional, like really old music of Wolastoqiyik, our people. And so she told me, if you wanna really know the old songs, if you really wanna get a deep understanding of it, you can't stick around here. Those songs they don't live here anymore. And she said, if you really want to hear them, you gotta go west. You gotta go to the museum and you gotta go into that archive. And she said, wouldn't it be nice if somebody could bring that back? Our elders, they always do this. They always they throw out like a general, like kind of like, wouldn't that be great if somebody were to go and bring those songs back to us? And so, but I kind of understood what my directive was, and so I went to the museum, spent a couple weeks there in the archives, and just kind of digging through all the plethora of content that was there, right? Because this anthropologist, he had lived in our communities. There's 7 communities all up the river here, and he lived there for 7 years. So he did some deep field work among our people. And so it wasn't just the music, although that I was mostly interested in that site just as a sound maker. But there was also, photographs. There was also like objects like drums and like moccasins and like deerskin, pouches and beading and all different kinds of different objects of my ancestors. And so I sat there with that for a while and kind of just tried to let it speak to me. And it was an incredible time because they really did, in a way. And what I knew instantly was that these can't be here. Like, they can't be locked up in this institution. Like, I know these archives and these museums, they're trying their best to preserve and protect our histories. However, there is, in my mind, a way in which these material objects of our people and these things that belong to our heritage can be ultimately accessible to our people, right? Mm-hmm. So why did I have to, take a plane or a train to get into the middle of the country, to access these archives? Why couldn't I just go to our community center down the street and do that? So for me, it was accessibility, and that's kind of the problem I wanted to solve, or sort of that issue that I saw out there that I thought could really be mended by accessibility. Just bringing those voices and those songs and my time and experience in that archive out to the people. So yeah, I guess I started to think about, like, okay, well, how do people meet music these days? How do they come to hear new songs? And maybe that's on YouTube or on Spotify, mm-hmm. or some of those things. So how can I get into those spaces? And then it started to dawn on me, well, maybe I'm not gonna be a traditional composer. Maybe I'm gonna make albums, and mm-hmm. and be a musician in that way if I really want to speak to people. If I really want to take my music to my people, that felt like the most accessible format to do that. So, and then the language piece kind of just came through the process, right? Mm-hmm. Understanding that, well, actually, to be honest, it came when I was studying classical music at university, and I was sitting, as a singer, you have to study languages too, right? So I was studying I was studying for a German test, trying to, get all these big, massive, compound German words in my head, and, it just was not sticking. And I kind of was just like in a kind of sort of epiphany moment, just to say, like, German's gonna be fine. There's a whole country of people. There's a couple countries of people that speak it over there. French will be fine. English is going to be fine. Only our language is spoken here. It is only spoken here. And it's in a real crisis moment right now. And so I got to be doing everything I can to be in support of that project, because when we lose that, when we lose a language, we don't lose words, right? Like language is so much more than that. Language is truly like our philosophy and our way of moving in the world and how we relate to one another. So there is a distinctiveness within language practice that is important to maintain. And I think a lot of peoples around the world, they understand that, especially when they're a linguistic group living outside, like in a hegemony that is not their own. I think we have to carve out this space all the time to say that, like, especially because we are the first peoples here, this is the only homeland that we know. So we need to carve out that space and insist on our sovereignties and insist on using our languages and not translating sometimes, and that's okay. I get a lot of people coming up after shows, asking for translations, and it's like, well, I can't flatten my world for you. You know what I'm saying? There is something that gets so lost within that act of simple word for word translation that I think is, it doesn't serve us to dull ourselves to each other. And I think that when we can sit inside that uncomfortableness of like maybe not understanding for a moment, there's actually something magical that happens on the other side of that, which is that we get transformed through a new understanding, or a new empathy, or seeing people outside of a headline, because the ways in which Indigenous people in this country are talked about are often not kind, and are often rooted in our traumas and rooted in the bad shit. That want to problematize that all the time and reframe our stories in joy. Because when I look in our community, this is what I see. I see resilience, and I see joy, and I see people that have survived over 500 years of colonization and are still singing and offering our gifts to everyone, not just our own people. And for me, that's something to celebrate.
And you mentioned the word empathy before, and I think that's a really, really powerful thing that your practice and your music has offered to everyone, because I've listened to your album several times, and it's given me a deeper understanding, even though, as you said, there are no translations, even though I don't understand what it means. There's a kind of spirit to the culture that's embedded within it, and I feel like that's the powerful aspect of the music.
For me, I guess I kind of took that lesson from the world of opera, which is to say that, like, to be honest, when we go see an opera, and it's not in our language of origin, I really don't think most people are sitting there reading the scroll titles. It's nice as a reference point, but we go to be transported into stories. And I think when we let ourselves do that and take away that mask of kind of direct understanding, we actually gain a lot from that. So I do thank classical music tradition or opera for showing me that, because it allowed me to step into a space to say that, like, it's all good. It's all good. Just, I'll see you at the other side of the concert. It's going to mean something to a lot of people. It might not mean something to you, but just trust that story that we're telling is bigger than the words that is included from word to word to word.
And what was it like navigating your practice and your Indigenous heritage into a classical music space? Was it uncomfortable? Did you have any deep and difficult conversations to have to overcome to get that into concert halls?
I mean, absolutely. I don't think nothing worth doing is like uncomplicated or easy. I don't know if that's how that's said, but you know what I mean. It's like that there's a certain level of tension and how the Germans would say Sturm und Drang about it. We got to have that push and pull, that sort of frenetic energy to create something big that's going to do something in the world. So yeah, I definitely had doubters and like people within classical music institutions that looked down on what I was doing, and said as much to me, or people that just didn't believe that we had something to offer in that space. And all the time, I guess I just had to insist that we did, and keep the vision strong, because I knew that. And it was especially beautiful coming to do that orchestral tour last year, to take our music to the highest form of that, the big sound, using every palette, every color in the palette. because it was a really beautiful opportunity for each of those cities and those symphonies to engage, not just with me, because at the end of the day, as an Indigenous person, still I am a guest in Calgary or in Toronto or in Vancouver. There are local Indigenous people everywhere. And I think we got to always remember that. So it's not just enough to bring in one artist from across the country, that represents their people and shares their songs in their language, but also how are we engaging our local communities, as programmers, as people that are making the decisions, making those curatorial choices, like how all the time are we looking at our feet and looking at the ground and saying, okay, but who's been caring for this land, for a lot longer than us, and it might be us, and that's a fine answer too. But how are we engaging? Because, keep in mind, like Indigenous people, we sometimes make these same oversights too. We aren't in relationship with our local stewards, and I kind of had to learn this not the hard way, but just the long way, to say that, like, going around and I will just say that, like, because I don't want to get stuck too negative, and I'll provide the way that I got out of it and my methodology now, because I think, we can get sort of stuck in the mud here. But what I will say is, now all the time, everywhere I go, I know whose land I'm on. I know the treaties in which they've signed. I know the languages that they speak, and I know maybe try to learn a couple words, as a sign to say that, like, I am a visitor in this place. I am grateful to be here, and here is who I am from our perspective, from my perspective. Please share with me who you are. And when concert halls and venues and presenters really get that right, it is such a beautiful coming together of local people and of newcomers and people, and visitors and all of these, and it becomes grounded and rooted within a local tradition, which is to say that, like, everywhere has a different way of gathering and welcoming and all these kind of stuffs. And if we can start to hand over that microphone and start to hand over that curatorial space and start to hand over the keys to the concert hall, who knows what's going to happen? For me, it's always a chance to, like, keep that door open and let as many people in as possible, so that we can have many different voices at the table, so that we may, like, know each other better, like I said, not dulling ourselves to each other as we meet.
And I like the idea that it becomes a super collaborative community space. I used to have this dream that one day, like, a concert hall could just be a civic space rather than this kind of quiet space that, people can only enter if they have a ticket or dress the right way.
Well, it's really interesting to, like, kind of frame it off the site of a museum too, or like a site of an archive, because they do take this kind of institutional form of, like, ticketing and, like, coat checks and, like, concession stands, and, like, I just think there's, like, there's other ways in which we could gather, that aren't about solely capitalism and reproducing, like, the rigid models that we've been offered. And I guess, for me, it's kind of, I'm leaning away from that concert space all the time and kind of thinking about, oh, how do I take my music into outdoor festival spaces if I really want to talk to a lot of people? Or how do I get my music into, and then I dance this whole thing of, like, oh, well, I'm not going to go into a bar and do my music. Like, that's not really what I want to do either. So it's about finding, but I guess, finding a space that could hold all of that, which we don't really have. We need, like, a new concert hall. I like your idea. Just, like, we got to make it a civic space and, like, really open it wide open. I think that's really gonna, in the same ways, I just think it would reinvigorate it, because right now we look at, and it's just, I look at the institutions here and they don't feel relevant. They just don't feel like they're joining in the current conversation.
For our second intermission is a recent work emblematic of Jeremy's incorporation of Western art music into his practice. This is an excerpt of Honor Song, performed here in collaboration with cellist Yo-Yo Ma on Ma's 2021 album, Notes for the Future. Yeah, they also feel like they're like guarding something for some reason. They're guarding this old perception of what or how cultural knowledge is made, or the value of old objects, many of which are not their own, but they're guarding them away from the public rather than opening it up. And there's like only a specific way to read them or to engage with them, and you can't touch the musical instruments because they're behind glass. So, yes, lots of things like that. This is a completely different, irrelevant story, but a friend of mine who's a collaborator, James Nguyen, who's a filmmaker, and I have been working on this project to regather these old Vietnamese drums. They're about 3,000 years old. And it's because we're both of Vietnamese heritage, but we're part of the Vietnamese diaspora now after several waves of also colonization. And we've been trying to reclaim them from French collections, from collections in Europe and America and Australia. And after so much negotiation and so much paperwork, which I'm sure you had to jump through when you were doing your archival research, like how much permission you require to access your own object from your own community, they said no. So we had to, quite literally, we went to the art market and bought one. So we self-repatriated our own objects back to us in order to activate them and share that musical tradition that our culture has lost, because it's something from 3,000 years ago. So that process, it just brought all that back when you were talking about the archives, because the lack of accessibility to objects that are ours is shocking.
Yeah, truly, it's shocking, and it's like, and even when we, as you're stating, like even when we do go through the processes and the ways in which they want us to make those rematriations and repatriations, like it doesn't happen. And so I don't know. I've been inspired by some of the like African diasporic activism that's been happening in museums as well, where they're just like, well, we're just gonna take our stuff then, which kind of falls in line with maybe a little more my political ideology, which is like ask for forgiveness rather than permission, and that's kind of how it was with how I was working on my stuff. Was like I just started using them in live shows. I put them on record. I wanted them to be with the people. So it didn't really matter to me who was asserting copyright over these things, because they're not owned by a museum or by an anthropologist. They're owned collectively, and they're not even owned by me too. That's also an important distinction also, it's like to say that like these are collective ownership for all of our people. And that those lines they're certainly not drawn by Canada or by the institution of a museum or an archive. So, that might get me into trouble sometimes. And I had a visit from the intellectual property rights people.
Oh no.
At the end of the day, if we stand strong in what we believe, and I think know what our vision is, which is to say that like we all just want it to be accessible. They just have a very different idea of what that looks like. And for me, I'm unwavering in who this needs to be with and who it needs to be for. And really, because I'm just executing the wishes of my elders, right? Like they're the ones that want me to bring this back. And so I don't really care about what the copyright is talking about. No, that doesn't matter. I'm gonna do what I gotta do to get these back. I love that, you just went around and bought it, because this is like, and it's so sad that we have to do these things, but it does really show the absurdity of these copyright and these institutions which seem to throw claim over things which are not their own, and which were never their own, and which were often stolen under duress, right? So yeah, I don't know. I think about what the solution is, and take it all back, and they would, and why they don't want to give it back is that, oh, you don't have the proper rooms, you don't have the infrastructure that it takes to house it and care for it in the ways that we do, and so we're just gonna continue to care for it if that's okay with you. And it's like, well, no, actually, because at the end of the day, and there's this really wonderful case that was out of, I think it was the West Coast here, like in BC, where they repatriated a bunch of their stuff, but rather than putting it like up on a shelf and doing the same kind of thing with it, actually burned everything, which is like,
to free it, I imagine.
yeah, right, because when we, like in our way of thinking, it's like those like they're not objects, like they're life. itself, you know, and they're like the skins that like that are used, or like the beads that are used, all of that has memory, and it all like it was just imprisoned for the last, you know, 120 years. And so they had their artists make replicas of everything, but those specific ones they wanted to set them free in that way. So, you know, but I think we need to understand that as long as we're equipping our young artists with the tools and the trades that they need to keep our ways going, then we don't need to hang on to a vision of the past that isn't even reflective of who we are as Indigenous people, or any cultural peoples. You know, it's like we culture is living, and it is today, right? And so as long as we can keep in mind where we come from and know that and let it inform what we do to create today, we don't need to keep these things hostage in a museum. Like, what is that impulse that wants to like hang on, you know? And you look at this kind of why this museum project maybe started specifically around Indigenous people was in the early 1900s. They were basically slaughtered, you know, we were dying from disease. They were like, well, you know, native looks like native people are going to die out in the next century or next generation. So it's our benevolent, you know, goal to make sure that we protect their culture and preserve it, right? Not acknowledging that, you know, maybe this like slow genocide that they were trying to propagate against Indigenous peoples in North America wasn't going to work. And the fact that we were going to be here before Canada and after. So I think, yeah, what I kind of more and more understand why they would burn it, you know, because it is a symbol of we are objects and we are owned and we are possessed by a settler colonial state, rather than we are sovereign and we are continual. You know what I'm saying? It's like we're still here, our songs are still sung, our languages are still spoken, and now is the time when we need to really turn to ourselves and get strong, because we just like experienced this really long path of trauma and healing, and now we got to really get right. So that's why I think our languages are so important to bring forward in our songs too, because
I
they
almost
tell
have
us who
nothing to
we
say.
are.
That was so beautiful. Well, it goes back to what you said before about culture being living, and I think museum traditions and the need to kind of like collect things and preserve them is because very much I was trained as an archaeologist, and when I was working in archaeology, we're often told that objects have a single function, because maybe in Western culture or a long period of time in Western culture they do. It's just a spoon or a kitchen pot, and they'd like to impose that notion of an object having a single function onto every other culture that we study, and it doesn't operate like that anywhere else. So when you go to a museum, everything has one label, one function, it comes from one culture, and then there's this wonderful thing that they like to do, and they presume that culture is static, and that's just not reality. So you're definitely challenging that through action and through music.
And it sounds like you are too. I'm so glad to hear it. Because we all got to, because we have to insist on our humanity and insist on our contemporality, right? Because I think all the time we're being denied that. Or we're saying, well, oh, you're being an identitarian, or like you need to just like, you know, stick to the classics, you know. But it's like, no, we got something special here and we need to insist on it, you know, because it is going to change the landscape of Western art music and Western society, you know. And I think we're listening to each other in a new way that we've never before, you know. And I'm really encouraged by this moment, because I think so many different voices, you know, whether it's in the cultural space, but even in, you know, gender and sexuality space, in socioeconomic space, I think there's so many different ways in which we have access to narratives that are not our own. And I think that's going to create a society of super empathetic people, I hope, because we're also going to have to fight the not super empathetic people, and show them that it's really nice over here. It's nice to be this way. And we got to insist on that too. So,
And welcome them. It's not scary on this side.
that's the thing. We're not trying to fight. I shouldn't even frame that as a battle. You know, we want to offer them the lens that we see. And I think maybe that's what music does too, right? Like it really it provides somebody a window into a world that is vastly different from their own, but also can look really beautiful, and can be an invitation, you know. And so I hope, you know, even though I created this record, and my first project, around really trying to speak to my people and hopefully, you know, creating a fire so that they may bask in the warmth of that glow, but also understanding that lots of other people gathered around that fire too, and they want to hear people from outside of our community, people that don't speak Wolastoq, people that want, um, a new way of relating to each other. And I think as Indigenous people, we have, something to offer in that way that has not been listened to or has not been a valid, way up until recently. And so I'm, you know, but up until, you know, people started to insist on it, people like, you know, I'm not sure if your listeners will be familiar with people like Buffy St. Marie, who's like an amazing Indigenous singer-songwriter from over this way, who really for a long time was the only one of us in the room, and you know, she took up a lot of important space and really talked about our ways, to the wider public. And then, you know, more recent examples like, DJ group A Tribe Called Red here in Canada, um, really pushed the conversation and insisted on our temporality and on our contemporariness. Not a word. Um, but yeah, so I guess I'm just walking the pathway that's kind of been cleared for me, and hopefully in my tailwind I can create a little more space for people that, you know, see what I see and want to create positive change for our people and for all people.
Do you think us reframing what it means to listen to one another will help?
Totally. Yeah. And I go all the time to Pauline Oliveros, you know, talking about, deep listening and what that actually requires of us. Um, because I think empathy is actually a really big part of that, you know, and the fact that when I truly listen, to you or to anyone, um, you know them in a new way, because it's not just about what you're hearing, in an auditory way, but you're sensing so much from that person as well. So, yeah, we got to listen to each other. It's the only way. You're right, and we got to reframe about. Uh, I guess we gotta know that everyone's got a song, you know, and everyone's bringing a really beautiful song. And it might not sound like our song, and it might be totally something we never heard before, and maybe something we never want to hear again. But it doesn't change the fact that they sing that song so beautifully in the way that they were taught to sing that song. And I mean that across the board, everybody. You know, whether we think we're a singer or not, we're still singing a song. So, yeah, I guess just we gotta know that and know that, you know, our elders, they teach that like we're all kin, we're all brothers and sisters, you know, no matter where we come from, or even what we carry in our heart, we're still brothers and sisters. And as a family, we need to, uh, really think about coming together in this moment, right? Because, you know, we look at the ways our environment is, um, shaking us and trying to tell us, you know, something. You know, the world's going to be fine. I'm not worried for the world. I'm worried for us. And so I think we got to come together and we got to understand broader ways, right? Because I think the logics and the worldviews that got us into this place are not going to be the logics that get us out of it, you know. So we need to be listening to other kinds of voices so that we can get a better way.
Well, my last question is actually quite a broad one, broadish, I suppose, and mildly self-serving, which is, do you have any advice for any up-and-coming young musicians, classical or not classical, about how to navigate their space, especially if they're interested in becoming activists and reclaiming their culture in this space?
I'm a little allergic to advice, I'll be honest with you, just because I think, we're so individual in our experience, and all of our contexts are so nuanced that, you know, what led to my ability to do music for a full-time job, or to to speak something into a musical space that is different than what's come before. I think we all have that possibility, and we all have something that we care about as much as Wolastoqiyik language, or, you know, as ancestor songs, you know. That might not be everybody's sight, you know. It might not be about, you know, thinking about your ancestors. It might not be about thinking about your language. But I think we've all got, based on our true passion and our gift, there's always an angle in which we can make that the best that it can be. And I think whatever you do, it has to be the best. And I don't mean that in like a way to pressure anybody, because I think, because even what we call the best has to be our own metric, right? So for example, when I say the best and we're in a conversation about classical music, that might, you know, lead to us thinking of, I'm talking about virtuosity, you know, or the speed in which you can play your piece, or the beauty in which you can pull out of those notes. That's not really it, you know. For me, I think a metric is your own to set and to honor, and or to not, right? And so I guess my piece of advice, if I'm forced to give one, is that know your metrics, know what success is going to be for you, and know that it's okay if it's not what it looks like for other people. You know, I had another interview asked me the other day, you know, what's your biggest accomplishments in this? You know, you've been going around, you're doing these things, and what do you think are your biggest accomplishments? And I said, well, I have two actually. I think they had done their research, and they kind of expected me to say one thing, you know, these awards that I won, or this medal or whatever, you know. But for me, or who I worked with, but it's like, for me, there's two moments. I was sent a video maybe a couple months after my album came out, and there was a group of young girls in the community here that had gotten together and choreographed a dance in their traditional regalia to one of my songs. And to understand that like real act of repatriation, of really like bringing it back so that our young people can actually engage it, was happening, there's no better reward for me. So that, you know, and that was my metric, was to say, like, I want this to live among my people. I want it, you know, it's great if it, you know, gets on the radio or like has a little bit of success, I win an award, whatever, that's fine. But I want it to live with people here, you know. And when that kind of came clear that, okay, yeah, he was doing that, that was a really nice moment of like, yeah, cool, I did it. And then the other one was like my elder, who kind of encouraged me to go to the museum, and Maggie, who I was talking about earlier, she, you know, really was a huge mentor and encouraged me a lot to go on this journey. And I saw that she put on Facebook, after I sent her the album, listened to her for the first time, she said, she was just going off, you know, oh, I can't believe it. This is one of the best things I ever heard. I can't believe what he's doing. Anyway, I saved it in my computer, because that kind of, you know, to go from that idea, that germination. Oh, here's my other piece of advice too. So this is making me think of something, which is to say that you got to move on your own timeline too. I think we get really tripped up, because especially the schools that we get taught music through are really oriented on a particular kind of path, which is to say that, you know, you do your 4-year thing, and then you do your 2-year thing, and then you're auditioning, and then you do all that. And it's like, if you want to create something in this world and you have a vision for it, you gotta step out of that lane a little bit, and insist on your own time frame. Because good work takes time, and it doesn't happen in a granting cycle or on a season basis, or, you know, it takes real like deep planning. You know, this record that I did, it took me 5 years, from the research, development, the composition, the recording, the package, everything. You know, it's like it's a real large process, you know, and we got to talk about process, you know, because I think often, you know, like classical musicians kind of like try to play this illusion of like the duck on the water, which is to say that there's a lot happening down here below the surface, but we just try to glide along and make it look effortless. But then I think that actually does us a disservice, right? Because it is effort, you know, and we got to acknowledge that, and we got to honor the work that it takes to make music in these ways. And so take the time it takes and honor the process. Anyway, I was like, I hate giving advice. Here's 10 pieces of advice that I give you. Sorry, yeah.
No, it's so true, because I remember I also did like the ultimate classical music training, and I trained as a composer. I went to the conservatoire, but they do make it look like this seamless process, and it's the only way that you can be, you know, credible in this line of work is if you follow the path that was drawn out 200 years ago. And you know, it doesn't work like that. The classical music loves to frame it as like a solo geniuses, and that's the pathway you follow, when it's not like that. It's collaborative, and there's a community, and I have failed so many hundreds of times. And we don't really talk about failure in this line of work.
That's so true too, right? Yeah, the whole like toxic success. Oh my gosh, yeah. It's like no, I welcome a blunder. I welcome a weird tweet. I welcome a bad acceptance speech. I welcome a wrong note. I welcome all of it. It's like because it has to be part of it, and it's always like, well, I'm now that I'm not touring so much, I've finally been able to like start growing plants, and so I'm a bit of a plant parent. And you know, my friend kind of gave me a couple of his plants to look after, but kind of gave to me, you know. And I went away and I did a gig for a couple weeks, and I came back and I killed it. And I called my friend and I said, oh, you know, I'm so sorry. Like I'm kind of upset, you know, like I killed your plant you gave me. And he says, go and get a bottle of wine. Go celebrate. You know, you did a good thing. You're a little more on your way to becoming a proper plant parent, because only through not being able to keep them alive will you know how to listen to them and to really understand how um, to you know care in that way, is through trial and error and getting it wrong until you get it right. So that was that's kind of what the pandemic was teaching me, and what plants were teaching me, and kind of some lessons that came forward in this time, was to say that, like, yeah, getting it right is just is merely but a point on the spectrum of getting it wrong all the time. Um, and we ought to be humbled by these instances, but not shaken, because the continuance and the insistence on our vision is what's going to create a beautiful final product. And then those mistakes, which actually, you know, get kind of woven into our work in a beautiful way, and we get to contextualize them, and we get to tell the story of them, and heal the sickness that might be inside of them. Yeah, we got to welcome these things, but it's hard. Oh my goodness, it's hard.
Yes.
Oh Lord. Well, I wish you many failures and many successes.
Same to you.
Really nice to chat with you. Wow.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to this. I so appreciate it. Taking the time out, and it almost feels weird for me, having seen you on stage so many times and listening to your music for so many years, to speak to you in person.
Well, we finally get to do it, and I hope it's not the last time. That would be
exactly. That would be wonderful. I will
well,
let you know.
You do let me know if you make it this way, because
I will.
I'd love to show you around this beautiful land. It really is. It's so special, and it's worth singing for. It is worth living for. And I guess, you know, I think there's something really important happening right now, culturally, globally, and it's cool to be a part of it. And I think we can really run from the scariness of it and the unsurety of it, or we can run right into it, you know. and it's only the people that are creating right now that are running into it, whether or not it's music or podcasts, or it's the creatives that I think are either naive enough or smart enough to run into this time of crisis and look at it through a magnifying glass. Thank you for doing the work you're doing and trying to problematize these spaces that have a lot of history and kind of a lot of darkness. But I think the more we shine light on these institutions and think and celebrate the successes and to celebrate times in which we've done something really beautiful and changed that space. I think we got to celebrate it, and I think the work you're doing is that. I hope the work I'm doing is that complication, and I hope we'll meet in the middle, maybe in person someday. Could you imagine?
Yes, I know, it would be incredible. Well, I must thank you for the work you're doing, because you were the first person who brought me into this space, just from listening to your music and listening to you talk. So it means an awful lot. It really does. And you've reminded me that through listening, we can find empathy. Thank you so much, Jeremy. I really appreciate it.
Once again, Jeremy, thank you so much for speaking with me and for letting me listen to your story and your words and about your practice and your hope. I really hope to speak with you soon and to see you perform one day soon, as I'm sure everyone who's listening will definitely be as well. If anyone out there wishes to check out more of Jeremy's work or read up or access anything we've spoken about through the episode, everything will be available to you in the links below, as well as in this episode's transcript. Thank you to Jeremy again, and catch you all soon.